So this is our next episode of the Asia Network meetings of the Incubating Feminist AI project. This is the first meeting of our second year of the project, which is overall the sixth meeting. Last year, we had 5 really great meetings where really great people came in to talk with us about a variety of topics related to AI and social inclusion and feminist issues. Today we have Dr. Stephanie Santos from the Metropolitan University in Denver. I don't know if I pronounce the name of the university correctly. I apologize for that. And she is now a Fulbright researcher here at the Center for Science, Technology and Society at Chulalongkorn University. She's going to be with us here in Bangkok for half a year. And then her topic today is really interesting, labors of artificial intelligence. But before that, I would like to tell us a little bit about the call for proposals that we are having right now. The call has been out since a few days ago, and then it's open for everybody, which is a team of researchers. Anyone who is interested can, because there can be more details than we have time for. You can just contact me, or you can go to the website. I hope you can see it here, eoi.a+alliance.org here, which contains all the needed information. But the bottom line is that you can team up with your colleague. We don't accept proposals from individual researchers. It must be a team, and the team must consist of an interdisciplinary subjects. So if you are from computer science, for example, you must team up with a social scientist and vice versa. And then the proposal, the project aims to look at various ways where AI, artificial intelligence, can promote social equality. And we interpret social equality in a broad way. So you have a lot of freedom in thinking about how to answer this challenge on how to utilize the power of AI. And it can be also critical, because we have the critical perspectives where you have a critical look at how AI fares in society, can be very important also. But in any case, since the team consists of computer scientists, we would like to combine the documentary and conceptual research and actual development of application, or at least a concept analysis of the kind of application that you would like to develop. So this is an exciting time. We are having this call for expressions of interest belonging to the project, Incubating Feminist AI project. And those of you who are interested are really encouraged to go to this website, eoi.a+alliance.org. But this is a kind of a promotion part. The real part is Dr. Santos's talk on labors of artificial intelligence. So Dr. Santos, you have the floor. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Dr. Swaraj. Let me start with sharing my screen. Okay, I just want to...
Yes, I can see it now. Great.
Are you seeing the PowerPoint?
Yeah. Right.
Oh, it's strange because I'm not seeing it, but okay.
Oh,
there. What do you see now? Do you see the PowerPoint? Okay. So thank you for this. So I wanted to start with, well, good afternoon, everyone. My name is Stephanie Santos, and I work in the fields of Gender and Development, of Feminist Science and Technology Studies, and in Southeast Asian Studies. And I really want to thank Dr. Soraj and the Chulalongkorn Center for Science Technology Society, and for colleagues from the Puan Institute for helping to support this research and for being here today. I look forward to our conversations. So to start with today's talk, I invite you to look at these images of supposed forms of artificial intelligence. The image on the top left is from an article on content moderation about how companies like Twitter and Facebook are now using machine learning algorithms to identify and remove offensive content from social media. On the top right are Korean school children learning English from a robot named Enki. In the lower right, the image shows a pet avatar that monitors and keeps an elderly US-based client company. And on the lower left is a fleet of pink robots named Jeffrey who do food deliveries in Toronto. So these machines are discursively constructed as artificial intelligence, but what runs these machines is the very hands-on embodied labor of people who are located thousands of miles away. So Enki, the robot teacher, is powered in real time by human teachers in the Philippines whose faces are hidden behind the avatar of a white woman. Jeffrey, the pink robot with heart eyes who are zipping around Toronto sidewalks, is remotely driven by Filipino operators. And when the machine learning algorithms of content moderation flag potentially offensive content, it is human moderators in the Philippines and in India who are tasked with screening and deleting violent imagery. So it's a job that exposes workers to a stream of torture, child pornography, and gore. The pet avatar works 24/7 to monitor clients' vitals and reminds them to take their medication, and has real-time conversations specific to clients' lives. And it's able to do this because behind the avatars is a staff of workers in the Philippines and Mexico who work in shifts, assuming different dog and cat personas as they interact with several clients at a time. So all these labors are vital to lives in the global north. And it used to be that the extraction of these feminized labors from vulnerable workers also meant immigration. Right? We can think, for example, of how the US population's needs for elder and childcare in the 1990s was filled by migrant workers, most of whom were women of color. So what internet and communications technology, or ITCs, make possible now, however, is the transnational extraction and distribution of care work and other forms of reproductive labor. It's now possible to extract the care work without the care workers' migrating bodies. So this talk is drawn from my current research project on transnational digital labors that have emerged in the early 21st century, especially in Malaysia, Indonesia, and for the focus of this talk today here in the, in the Philippines, right? Specifically, I'm interested in the devalued labor, in the feminized labor that animates business process outsourcing technologies. So what is the significance? What do we learn about artificial intelligence by examining these transnational digital labors and by centering Filipino laboring bodies? So to answer this question or explore this question, my talk is divided into three main parts. In part one, this assembly is an overview of shifting modes of Filipino care work from labor migration to outsourced care work enabled by the business process outsourcing or BPO industry. So here I argue that this labor is devalued through fetishizing technology, supposedly as artificial intelligence, and disassembling the laboring bodies whose work animates these technologies. So these discourses of robots, automation, artificial intelligence, algorithms are deployed to discursively disassemble and obscure the digital laborers and the trauma and harm that they're subjected to. So in part two, I examine how workers push back against this disassembly by recasting their work as intimate labor. And in part 3, praxis, I make policy recommendations based on the situated knowledge of Filipino digital workers. And I end this talk with a short epilogue discussing future directions of this research, especially in terms of creating more just and equitable feminist technologies that respond to the needs of vulnerable populations. Pardon me. So since at least the 1920s, the extraction of Filipino care work has necessitated migration. The migration of Filipino care workers ramped up with the aging of baby boomers. And in pre-COVID, the Philippine Department of Labor estimated 5,000 people leave the Philippines every day for work. And up to 80%, excuse me, of that figure are women. So the scale of this migration, is evoked in this detail from artist Antipas de la Tava's painting Diaspora. This is actually my view of the airport every time I leave the Philippines, where you can see most of the travelers are traveling solo, and there's hardly any families, for example. So for background, the idea of this assembly builds from Aiwa Ong's work on the ideal gendered labor in Southeast Asian export processing zones, on discourses that disassemble laboring bodies into small hands and nimble fingers that make them ideal for factory work. In her analysis of this institution, so Dr. Neferti Tadyar, so I'm not sure if you're still here, but Dr. Tadyar brings out how the Filipino domestic body is rendered as a kasangkapan, or as a household item. And we can see that in artist Imelda Cahipe and Daya's rendering, right, of Filipino domestic labor, all right? And in this image, you can see how the wife's face is absent. Her torso is a bare suitcase because she's never at home wherever she is, right? So it's a relic of always not being at home. Her limbs are similarly disassembled into laboring appendages, such as a mop, a broom, dustpan, and an iron. And when I read Dr. Tadyar's analysis and saw this piece, I remember being very moved by the way the artist captures the metaphorical disassembly of the Filipino body. And I've had this piece in my mind again because of how digital workers are similarly disassembled into technology. So as a background, while call center work comprises the largest share of the business process outsourcing industry in the Philippines, for this talk, I'm focusing on another fast-growing industry, namely content moderation. As a description, as noted here by Sarah T. Roberts, content moderators are a vital but a little known subset of the BPO industry in the Philippines. So their work ranges from the innocuous. For example, they remove copyrighted music from YouTube. It also goes into the traumatic, right? They're charged with reviewing images of child abuse or violent murder on Facebook or Instagram. So commercial content moderation can be kept in-house with review teams in Silicon Valley, but more often it's outsourced to precarious gig and micro workers doing digital piecework. And in the Philippines, this outsourced digital work occurs almost exclusively within the pre-existing BPO infrastructures. So this slide shows just some of the BPO firms in the Philippines, and it signals the global assemblage that produces content moderation. So this global assemblage involves this distributed hierarchy of human labor and artificial intelligence, stretching from Silicon Valley to South and Southeast Asia. So this is the infrastructure that makes the outsourcing of labor and trauma possible. It's an assemblage that creates a segmentation between what gets constructed as like the high-end cognitive tasks done in countries in the global north, and the routine maintenance tasks such as transcription, data entry, customer service that get outsourced to countries like the Philippines via these third-party firms. And my starting point in thinking about the labors that animate artificial intelligence, or more more accurately, artificial intelligence, is what Donna Haraway calls the situated knowledges of transnational digital workers. Because these situated knowledges are ignored or actively silenced in the triumphalist discourses from the state BPO nexus, another challenge is where to find these situated knowledges. And to address these theoretical and empirical challenges, I build on feminist anthropologist Anne Laura Stoller, whose work on Indonesia examines not just dominant official forms of knowledge production, but also what she calls the ruins and the debris that people are left to deal with. So for example, poor health, destroyed landscapes, interrupted social and personal lives. And because the digital workers directly affected by these technologies are shut out of dominant development discourses, I build on Nefertiti Tadyar's work of looking to cultural production to study the experiences that fall away from these mainstream discourses of globalization. So I begin with an analysis of cultural production, and specifically here are scenes from the documentary The Cleaners about content moderation in the Philippines. So in the first few minutes of the film, we, the viewers, don't see workers' faces at all. Instead, like in Kahipe and Daya's installation, we see a disassembly. We see pair after pair of eyes that are bathed in the bluish light of a computer screen. We see fingers clicking away at mouse buttons. We hear voices chanting delete, ignore, over and over again. Mirroring Aiwa Ong's study of Malaysian workers in export processing zones, content moderators are disassembled into scanning eyes, chanting lips, into nimble fingers, clicking mouse buttons every few seconds, up to 25,000 times a day. So by devoting attention to this disassembly, both My Wife is a DH and The Cleaners powerfully illustrate Filipina content moderation and Filipina domestic work in their disassembled embodiment. This disassembly also continues in corporate literature. So for example, in their pamphlets, the BPO firm Accenture forecasts a near future in which, quote, efficient and effective content moderation at scale will be defined by a more synergistic relationship between humans and AI. So Accenture, like Facebook, Twitter, and Google, posits development in AI will one day make human roles in content moderation obsolete. However, in desiring this more synergistic relationship between humans and AI, Accenture also shows how its promise of a bionic future depends on this more thorough amalgamation between human labor and machine and intelligence. So in other words, Accenture's belief in its bionic future depends on the continuous development of content moderators, not as technology workers, but as being assimilated into the technology itself. And then this slide shows the research that I've begun to do on Care Coach, which is the company behind the pet avatars. And I can share more about this in the discussion if you'd like. But just as a quick overview, note how in the top left of the screen, it is technology or tech that's credited with caring for aging parents, right? On the lower right in the company's career section, it states that our health advocate hiring process is highly specialized and not open to the public. So they're not hiring, at least in the United States, but this position is advertised in Glassdoor.ph in the Philippines. So the hiring for this position is only happening outside of the global north. So for now, against this disassembly, I'd like to turn to the question of worker subjectivity, of how workers conceive of their work. And for that, I turn to intimate labor, right? So as background, in May 2020, Facebook reached a $52 million settlement with more than 10,000 content moderators in compensation for their mental distress and trauma. So it's a landmark acknowledgement of the toll that content moderation takes on its workers. However, this settlement was limited to workers in the United States. and their counterparts across the Pacific, in India, in the Philippines, were left out entirely. And in fact, I'm worried that one of the effects of this settlement would be to further push platforms like Facebook to outsource content moderation altogether. So this research also builds on Eileen Boris and Rosel Salazar Pareñas' definition of intimate labor as activities that, quote, promote the physical, intellectual, affective, and other emotional needs of clients. I also draw from Purnima Mankekar and Akhil Gupta's writings on call center work as intimate labor provided at a distance. I argue that Filipino content moderation, remote teaching, remote elder care profoundly reconfigure how we conceive of distance, proximity, and embodiment in the era of digital outsourcing. The difference is, while earlier forms of Filipino care, such as nursing and domestic work, were inextricable from the laboring body, the digital platform obscures the corporeality of the care work performed by Filipino content moderators, making this care akin to artificial intelligence. So what does it mean then to build from the situated knowledge of content moderators? And what can we learn about AI and artificial AI from the debris of these global assemblages of labor? Let's go back to the Facebook lawsuit. All right, so the assumption in that lawsuit was that Filipino workers are themselves insusceptible to the trauma of their USian counterparts, which is of course not true. And content moderators in the Philippines are starting to speak out. One former content moderator describes, for example, now being drawn to footages of bestiality and incest long after having left the position that first exposed him to this material. Others have reported anxiety, exhaustion, compassion fatigue, suicidal ideation, and self-harm. It's an industry where, quote, almost everyone knows about someone who committed suicide because of the work, such as the person who attempted suicide, quote, in a motel room, reenacting a scene he had reviewed the year before. In this last tragic example, we can see how it's not just the labor, the scanning eyes, the nimble fingers that are outsourced. These global assemblages of BPO work also outsource trauma. And the situated testimony of content moderators and the cleaners helps to explain their decision to speak out on record despite onerous non-disclosure agreements. So, quote, the reason why I speak to you is because the world should know we are here. There is somebody checking social media. We're doing our best to make this platform safe for all of them. Another states that their job is to, quote, make the platform healthy as possible. And another worker describes their job as preventer of sin, stating that I help people. I stop the spreading of child exploitation. I have to identify terrorism. I have to stop the cyberbullying. Algorithms can't do what we do. So most laboring bodies in intimate industries are still subjected to very rigorous management and surveillance regimes as surplus labor who could be routinely exposed to trauma and disassembled as interchangeable commodities. By conceptualizing their labor in terms of helping, preventing, and keeping users safe, moderators push back against their disassembly to recast content moderation as caregiving. By using terms such as healthy and asserting their corporeal labor, moderators highlight how they routinely absorb the risks that come with creating the moderate spaces that are necessary for users of social media. So against their disassembly into digital appendages, these situated testimonies recast their work as intimate labor, connected to the affectively complex work of nurses, live-in caregivers, even call center agents, thus illuminating the corporeal, affective, and intellectual labors of content moderation. So their insistence that the world should know that we are here signals a nascent form of worker subjectivity, where Filipino content moderators see beyond their being subsumed into the technology of social media platforms. It's a refusal to be disassembled into artificial intelligence and executable code. So in part 3, I turn to praxis, to socially relevant action. And here I build on Kimberly Crenshaw's work on intersectionality. So more than just a claiming of identities, Crenshaw asserts that the situated knowledge coming from Black women who experience multiple forms of marginalization in the workplace necessitates a rethinking and a rebuilding of legal systems and structures. And in the same vein, I ask, how do we rethink transnational digital labor, not under Western eyes, but centering the situated knowledges of Filipino transnational digital workers? So this photo shows Filipino BPO employees sleeping on the floors of their offices because the lockdowns meant that there was no public transportation, and because they were trying to protect their loved ones from exposure to COVID. So in the Philippines, BPO employees were designated as essential employees, meaning they were required to come to work, and that these were the working conditions that they were subjected to. So the BPO Industry Employees Network, as a workers' organization, has called on the industry to provide work from home or near site accommodations, door-to-door shuttles, free coronavirus testing, and medical care. But in the photos and in this quote, we can starkly see how these essential workers, whose socially proximate labor makes possible the safety and the social distance of this very space, we can see how they're treated as surplus, disposable labor. So as a starting point for praxis, for mitigating the trauma of these labors, is to make policymaking accessible to the people most directly affected by these technologies, such as workers' groups who are saying and advocating for what they need. So from a more macro perspective, we need to rethink ways how we can measure, we need to rethink ways of measuring concepts relating to work, gender equality, because right now, these indices focus on wage labor, and this focus reflects the false segmentation of the higher cognitive knowledge work in the global north versus delete, allow in the Philippines, in India, and the global south. So many of our current indices elide over intimate labors, trauma, and the loss of personal and social relationships. And as scholars and advocates, it's our task to illuminate the affective complexity of digital labor and all these other forms of outsourced care work. And from the situated testimonies of mental health difficulties and suicides, it's also our task to rethink how we address issues of violence online. Social media platforms have addressed this through an automation that is really an outsourcing to vulnerable workers, a solution that involves unequal distribution of risk and harm. So one solution then would be to share in this vulnerability to harm. So to put this colloquially, I mean, I don't want to be doing research online and then accidentally be exposed to hate speech or a beheading. But as somebody who benefits from this incredible technology, I would and should risk that so that somebody else doesn't have to up to 25,000 times a day, right? So again, as feminist scholars of technology, it's our task to envision technology and development, not just in terms of the shared benefits. In a globalized world, we are also connected by our shared harm. So in conclusion, this is an invitation to think about the material consequences of these forms of disassembling and obscuring the feminized, devalued, but very vital labor that animates industries such as content moderation, online elder care, and other forms of artificial intelligence. So Art sent me a link earlier about making ChatGPT less toxic, for example, and it's a task that the task of rendering it as less toxic is being shouldered by workers in Kenya. So perhaps this is something that we can talk about what this means in discussion. As researchers, this is also an invitation to be feminist allies as platform workers assert the materiality and affective complexity of their labor. And finally, I argue that bringing about fair and just working conditions for digital platform laborers rests not just on technological solutions, but on new epistemologies of work and labor that are brought forth by the possibilities of artificial intelligence and internet and communications technology. What would it mean, for example, to think of the problem of violence on the internet, not as a matter of developing more sensitive algorithms, but instead in terms of a shared vulnerability? So I'm very excited to share that I've just started my Fulbright research on the ASEAN Smart Cities Initiative. And specifically, I'm interested in how state discourses and initiatives on smart cities envision and interpolate the new smart worker and the emerging socialities that this could engender for transnational digital workers in Southeast Asia. So I look forward to our continued conversations on ongoing forms of metaphorical and technological disassemblage in Southeast Asia, to building on situated knowledge from ruins and debris and from fallaway experiences, and to engendering more equitable development and technological futures, built not on dispossession, but on feminist understandings of our shared vulnerabilities and possibilities. So thank you so much, everyone, for your attention. Salamat. Kapkun ka.
Thank you, Stephanie. It was great. Something that I have not known before. So yes, let us clap. Yeah. So now we have time for discussion, question. Anything we'd like to talk about? I have. Yeah, we have.
I'm seeing things come in chat. Yeah.
We have a question, I think, from June.
Okay.
Yeah, she's in the public place, so.
Yeah. Do you want me to read out the question, or?
Yeah, that might be helpful. Yeah.
Okay.
Thanks.
Yeah. So yeah, thank you for your question, Jewel. You're asking, you want to pick up on a lingering question you've had since our institute. So from your research so far, do you see the military's impact and technology in the Philippines as connected to these AI technologies and service work? Oh, thank you for that. And I think, yeah, that might be a larger question we can talk about in the Feminist AI network as well with Dr. Sapawati and Dr. Soraj. What I could share from the Philippine case is that the building of the broadband initiative, so the infrastructure that's enabling the ICT technologies that allow for this extraction of labor is being built along the network of former US bases. So in fact, the entity, the government entity that's overseeing like the building of the cable lines that's connecting the Philippines to the internet, basically is the Bases Conversion Development Authority, right? So it's the entity that is in charge of converting what was formerly US bases to commercial and industrial land. So they are the ones who are charged with the cable landing stations. And if you look at the spine of where a lot of these internet hubs are being built, it follows the spine of US military institutions in the Philippines. It's part of what made me realize how many former, possibly still current US military institutions are in the Philippines. So.
Yeah.
Thank you for your question, Jewel. Yeah.
Yes, I'm thinking of the same kind of situation in Thailand. I don't know much, but as far as I understand, content moderation is I may be wrong, but my impression is that at least here in Thailand, it's done more by algorithms. I mean, I have not seen any news report of real life content moderators
Yeah.
here in Thailand. Perhaps, but we have more of a large group of people employed by the government. They do roughly the same kind of thing as content moderation, but they focus more on censorship. For example, they look for certain keywords and they look for kind of political statements, and then they do not censor those messages, but they kind of they enter into arguments against the people making the statements. So they can flood the social media with certain kinds of political statements to help influence public opinion, for example.
I see. Yeah.
I don't know if that's the same. Maybe not.
I think there's an affinity towards that. I mean, Dr. Jonathan Corpus Ong's work about the work of influencers in the Philippines, for example. So where that was an experiment in terms of like influencing public opinion that helped the Duterte administration get elected, for example, formed was a foundation, right, for the rise of authoritarian regimes like in the United States, the election of Trump. And I think what your example is showing to Dr. Sorash is these kinds of like, so supposedly these are done by machines, like by algorithms, but actually there's people who are engaged in this work, whether it's in Thailand or in the Philippines. It requires an affinity, a cultural affinity, right? A knowledge of the place you are in, which is why the Philippines is one of the biggest hubs for content moderation for the United States. So we were a former colony, and that kind of scholar John Patios calls this a form of Filipino-American relatability. So it's not an accident that content moderation is hidden behind technologies and then moved to the Philippines, considering this long history of labor exchange, right? And I think your example brings that out as well. So the people who can engage and be incendiary, for example, in terms of political content online, it would require some culturally a specific knowledge to be successful. So
yeah, thank you. Yes, I am really saddened by your pictures about people having to lie down on the floor and sleeping. But we have a question from Joshua on the chat box. Hi, Stephanie, I think you discussed AI's dependency on human interaction to inform AI behavior. Does this mean AI companies are mining human behavior to develop their technologies, rather similar to how Facebook was mining content to sell to Cambridge Analytica?
Oh, what an interesting question, Joshua. Thank you for that. Well, I mean, I'm thinking about this. It's more in your field, right? The mining of art for artificial art projects, and I'm sure you know more about that than I do. But probably just as an analog. Okay, I have to answer this question roundaboutly, right? So, that I forgot what it's called. So if somebody remembers the name of this technology, you can put it in chat. But you can. There's this technology where like I can. How do I see myself, my image rendered as an avatar, and supposedly it's this form of AI technology that mines all images of me and women who look like me, which would say like Asian women, and then render this in art form, right? And what people have been finding now is that these renderings are also very racialized. So if you compare, for example, renderings of white women and other women of color, so Asian women, Asian American women, this was a USCN-based research, are overwhelmingly rendered, depicted as highly sexualized. Highly sexualized and stylized, and the reason why that is happening is because of depictions and representations that already exist, right? That highly sexualized women of Asian descent. So as a way of sort of getting at answering or engaging with your question, Joshua, is mining human behavior is something that all these technologies do. So, and which is why they're not free from hypersexualization, from racism, from misogyny. And in fact, your question makes me think, right? So looking to technology as a solution, for example, for onerous or unfair working conditions, there's a lot of potential there, but I think a danger would be to just assume that because there's a technological advancement, then that itself is the answer, right? So these technological advancements, whether it's AI art, Chat GPT, and mining for art online, they're very much produced within systems of racism, of systems of misogyny, systems of unfair distribution of resources, and that's something that we have to be mindful as well. I mean, the technologies have a lot of potentials, but to be able to realize those potentials, we also have to be very aware of the conditions that produce it, so that we don't end up simply reproducing them. So yes, I hope that engages Joshua with your question. Salamat, thank you.
Yeah, I was talking about the pictures you showed a while earlier of people sleeping on the floor, and all this really bad condition. Isn't there kind of a law, or I would imagine that these people, I mean, there might be somebody like a lawyer or some NGO groups who help, there are some labor NGOs in Thailand who specialize, who take care of this matter, and they can bring matter out to the public via social media or the various forms of news media, and that they can get the authorities into action. Is there any type of that activity or some kind of organization among the labor themselves?
Yeah, it's been difficult. All right, so the furthest they have, and they just call themselves a workers organization. So there's an organization named BN, the BPOIEN, Employees Network, right? So and so what they've been asking for example, were these concessions about, like, allow us to work from home. But for a lot of BPO work, that's not possible, because they say they deal with credit cards, for example, or they handle medical information, which in the United States subjects them to privacy law. So you have to come, right? Or they're saying, like, give us housing that's not too far from where we are. So they're advocating for these very specific demands to make themselves safer. But a challenge for organizing people do content moderation, for example, is that this type of labor is it's done at will, right? So it's a lot of it is piecework. So with content moderation, increasingly with the pet avatars who do the care work, those are actually people who can work from home. Many of them can work from home. So if you're not working together, like in a space, if your labor is dispersed, then it becomes harder to organize. And also, if the harms that they're subjected to, I mean, a lot of the traumas, for example, well, they're physical, right? Mental health is something that is physical as well. A challenge is that in a country that doesn't have a healthcare system in the Philippines, then these are just not priorities. And in fact, like when Dr. Soraj, you mentioned that those images of BPO's workers sleeping on the floor. Actually, so this lockdowns started in March, right? So they started in March where BPO workers were still required to come to work, but March 2020. But before that, in January 2020, so before like the before times, before COVID, there was a volcanic eruption, like a little volcano exploded in Taal volcano, right? And in Santa Rosa, which is where my mom lives, she was telling me about how it was raining ash. There was ash that was up until like a little below your knee, for example. So it was virtually impossible to drive, and even the government offices had shut down, and they encouraged private firms to shut down. But Santa Rosa is also home to all these call centers and other BPO firms. They were required to go to work when it was so difficult. And the reason why they were required to go to work was, I think one of them said, our boss said that there's no volcanic eruption in New York, so we have to go there. So it really wasn't surprising for a lot of us who monitor these situations when COVID came, and then they were designated as essential workers in order to continue this extraction of their labor.
So I don't have any further questions.
Yeah.
But the group might have something else.
And I'd just be interested in people sharing your work and your questions and what you're doing, even as they like tangentially relate to issues of like automation, feminist critiques of this kind of work.
Yeah. Basically, this project, this talk is part of this project. As I said at the beginning, we try not to be too critical of AI, so to speak.
Yeah.
But we look at how AI could contribute to a more just, more equal society. So a big part of what we have been doing is to look at how the data set that is fed into AI could contain kind of more information that would help redress, correct the imbalance that has existed in AI data sets.
Yeah.
For example, a standard, what has happened quite a lot is that data from women and minorities, looking at the US context, are quite underrepresented, and the result is that AI is especially good for the majority, white males and so on, but not as accurate or not as efficient when it comes to women or the minority. So we try to redress that imbalance, but that is only one part, and your part is very important, and because we have to look not only at the technical aspect of the algorithms and the biases that are there, but the overall the wider context of AI companies and how they have been globalized and how they employ people not only in the US but all over the world and so on.
I think that's a really important point that you're bringing up, Dr. Soraj, like in terms of like what gets recognized as data and then incorporate it into these data sets and studies. And I think, yeah, and I think, you know, drawing from feminist knowledge of feminist theories of knowledge, right? So I think part of the potential, the really exciting potential for in terms of thinking about these data sets is what can be measured, what can be made possible. Previously, our indices for gender and development, for example, were quite limited, right? It looks at things like, I don't know, I mean, the number of women in elected positions, for example, in the Philippines. I'm not talking about the Philippines, for example, the number of women in elected positions, or the number of women in the paid economy. And it doesn't take into account, for example, like reproductive work, for example, or it doesn't take into account, I mean, like there are women who were farmers, for example, and then they get displaced from their fields. And then now they're working as overseas Filipino workers. But for the data set that measures gender and the economy, that's seen as something good, right? Because previously a work as a farmer, it's not as measured, whereas a wage as a domestic servant is measured. And so part of our challenge now that we're thinking about the data sets that get incorporated into AI is, well, what data sets included, what indicators, for example, and how we can measure that for more well, like textured measures of development and you know, the potentials of AI, I think.
Right. Yeah. So I think, you know, we can have more discussion of this kind, and I look forward to working more with you and with the group, you know, and it is really an honor to us at the center that you come to work with us as the Fulbright researcher. I see no further questions, and if we agree, we can cut it early. We are a small group, but we have known each other quite well, and then I'm sure we will continue our work together. So yeah, let us give Stephanie a hand.
Thank you all.
Thank you so much. Thank you so much.
Yeah, I just want to say too, I mean, I'm excited. We have an interdisciplinary group. We have engineers in this room. We have anthropologists and artists. And I feel like that's the kind of synergy that really pushes the potentials of AI as a force of feminist good. So
Yes. Thank you. So on that note, I would like to end the recording right now.
Thank you all.